Greetings, dear friends, fellow programmers, and those aspiring to be. Boy, do I have an exciting topic for you today. We are talking about JavaScript closures. Whether you're a seasoned developer or just getting started with your programming career, closures are something you should definitely consider investing your time and efforts into mastering, because it brings a whole bunch of benefits to all of us. So, if you would like to hear what I mean by saying that, just stick around and enjoy the video. So, the first and main question you should ask yourself, and in this case, me, is what are closures? And the answer is, a closure is a function that retains access to its outer scope even after the function in the outer scope is done executing. So to put things in a simpler manner, because I know that the definition I just said seems abstract, closure is a function that remembers variables from the place where it was created, even when that place no longer exists. You can think of it as a backpack, and basically a closure puts all of the variables into the backpack and keeps carrying them around everywhere it goes. And even when the function itself no longer exists and is not executed any longer, you still have the access to variables that were put in the backpack before it started going to the journey. So I hope now it makes more sense, but I still think the best approach to explain it is in action, because I know how much I struggled understanding closures while I was getting started with my coding experiences. So I will do my best to make everything as clear as possible. And also, this is not going to be the only video dedicated to closures. I will make an entire series dedicated to it, because this topic is so essential that basically truly understanding it is going to skyrocket your JavaScript programming experiences. I mean, I've been asked a question about closures on almost every job interview I've ever gone to where I was asked and spoke about front-end technologies. So I think it's definitely worth a while to spend some time understanding it really in depth. And on my side, I'll do everything I can to make that process as easy and enjoyable for you as well. Now, let's discuss a few scenarios where using closures is really beneficial. The first situation is data encapsulation. So whenever you want to prevent some outer layer of your application to not be able to access certain variables or functions, you can use closures to hide them and make them private and only accessible within that closure. So that's a great thing to have at your disposal. 2, they are great for creating function factories. So when you have certain functionality that you want to use multiple times to instantiate or create or do something multiple times, you can use closures to prevent users from going somewhere and doing something you do not want them to do, and ensure that they are doing exactly what the application should allow them to. Closures are what can enable you to make that happen flawlessly. Then we have callbacks and event handlers. Basically, closures ensure that you are always looking at the right scope of things and that you are accessing the variable values that you actually want to access. This means that closures retain access to the right context, thus allowing us to access variable values that we are looking for. And finally, we have module pattern. So closures, as we already mentioned, allow us to have certain private functionalities and certain public functionalities, and we will have the complete control over making the decision which ones are which. That means we can prevent some parts of our application from being accessed from the global scope, or we can allow just certain functionalities that will prevent others from being accessed. That way, we are just tunneling people into using what we want them to use. And now the moment is finally here that we are jumping into our IDE of choice. Of course, you can use whatever you like. In my case, I will be using JetBrains WebStorm IDE because I just like it for front-end stuff. And basically right here we have a very simple counter, this right here variable called count, and inside of it we have predefined value 0. And we have increment method that we are using to, you've guessed it, increment the value stored in the variable. It's a very simple application and it should work as expected. So we're printing the value of count whenever we increment its value. And because of the fact that we are invoking it 3 times, we are printing 1, 2, and 3. Because we are first time incrementing from 0 to 1, then from 1 to 2, and finally from 2 to 3. I just wanted to show you that I can, without any issues, access the count variable because it is defined in the global scope of our JavaScript file, and I can change its value, and when I run the application now, we will get 4 as well. That was the scenario without closures. Now let us comment this out and uncomment the part where we will be using closure. First off, let's discuss the closure itself. So we have created a closure right here inside of createCounter method. And inside of it, we have created a count variable again, but this time, as you can see, we made it private. Now, how do I know this? Well, because when I run the code, we get an error, and it states that count is not defined. This is because we are trying to access count variable, which is defined inside of the inner scope of our closure, which means it doesn't exist in the global scope of the application. And when we try to access it, stuff just doesn't work because we have no idea what count is. But when I comment these 2 lines out and I use this approach right here, everything should work exactly the same as it was before. We get 1, 2, 3. But let us explain how it does it. So, we first instantiate a counter. This process will actually go through the lines right here and create our private variable called count. And whenever we call counter, which is basically this variable we assigned a new counter instance to, whenever we invoke it with a function, so with braces in the end, we will invoke this part right here and increment the value that is stored inside of the count variable, which is local variable, private, and log the value. So basically, when we invoke this, we are actually accessing this variable and updating its value. So our closure works as a charm. We have prevented users from accessing the variable from wherever they want and do whatever they like with it, because we just want them to use our increment method that we created here and nothing else. We do not want to allow them to specify +5 to counter, because in the general scope right here, this scenario, they would be able to do that. They can add plus whatever they can add, 234, no problem. Variable exists and it is accessible. But in this case, we cannot allow that, and that is why user is prevented from doing that. So now it is time to go back and discuss the general story about closures. We have the option to create private methods and variables hidden inside of the closure, and we can do that for all the stuff we do not want to be accessible from everywhere in our application, and we can just decide which parts are going to be exposed and available. Also, a very important part to note is the fact that they are behaving like a backpack we discussed in the beginning, and closures store the value of the local variables and keep it safe without forgetting its value, which was shown in the case with our counter because we were invoking new increment method invocations, and the local value was reflecting those changes and remembering the previous state. So Those are some of the core features you should be aware of when talking about closures. Now, first of all, I would like to congratulate all of you dedicated people staying till the end of the video, because I know it was tough, and I want to say that in the next video dedicated to JavaScript, we will keep going about closures and extend the current knowledge with some additional scenarios where you can use them. So if that sounds interesting, I would like to kindly invite you to subscribe to the channel, turn the notifications on so you do not miss that upload, and until then, I would like to thank you for watching and wish you an amazing day. Happy coding!